Kamala Harris and Trump debate white fear, dehumanizing Haitian immigrants and mega-Republicans decline. Introduction. Last night's debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and President Trump was a revealing moment in American politics, exposing not just their ideological divides but a broader, deeper social rift. As Trump continued his inflammatory rhetoric, particularly concerning immigration, the debate underscored how deeply rooted the dehumanization of Haitian immigrants has become, driven by Trump and his followers. White fear and immigration. Trump's comments on immigration have long played on the fears of his base, especially when it comes to people of color. This debate further highlighted how Trump stoked the flames of what can be termed white fear, and anxiety about the demographic and cultural shifts happening in America. Haitian immigrants, among other groups, have become a focal point of this fear, demonized as symbols of change that threatens the imagined purity of America. The dehumanization of Haitian immigrants. Throughout his presidency, Trump has spoken about Haitian immigrants in disparaging terms. Last night, when discussing immigration policy, Trump's stance exemplified this trend, viewing immigrants from Haiti not as individuals seeking better lives but as threats to America's security and identity. His language consistently strips away their humanity, reducing them to political talking points that mobilize his base. Mega-Republicans and the fear-driven agenda. This kind of rhetoric is a cornerstone of the mega-Republican movement that Trump continues to lead. In pandering to his base, Trump's policies and discourse are increasingly driven by fear. This fear is not just of immigrants but of an America where white people no longer hold the dominant cultural and political power. As Harris pointed out, this fear has led to harmful policies that have hurt not just immigrants but American society at large. Path toward self-destruction. As Trump doubled down on his hardline stance, Harris delivered a more inclusive vision, warning that Trump's fear-mongering would lead the GOP into a big hole from which it might not recover. Trump's insistence on framing Haitian immigrants as part of the problem alienates not only immigrants but also many Americans who recognize the value of diversity. In this way, the Republicans, under Trump's leadership, digging themselves into a hole by rejecting an increasingly multicultural future. The original King Kong, 1933, can be analyzed as a metaphor for white fear, particularly in relation to race, interracial relationships, and the dehumanization of Black Africans. This storyline provides a lens to examine cultural anxieties prevalent in America during the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, particularly regarding race and racial dynamics. Here's how the film's themes compare and contrast with the dehumanization of black men and white fear around interracial relationships. Comparison and contrast of themes in King Kong and white fear. 1. King Kong as a metaphor for the dehumanization of black men. In King Kong, the giant ape is depicted as an enormous, fearsome beast taken from a remote island. His overwhelming size and brute strength are exaggerated to emphasize his power, paralleling stereotypes of black men at the time. The metaphor of King Kong, an untamable, dangerous creature, captures the historical dehumanization of black men, who were often seen as a threat to white society, particularly in the context of relationships with white women. This reflects the racial anxieties that existed in the 1930s, when interracial relationships were not only taboo but also actively criminalized and vilified. 2. Interracial relationships and white fear. A significant layer in the original King Kong is Kong's obsession with Ndaro, the white woman he becomes infatuated with after being captured and brought to New York. This dynamic taps into white fear surrounding black men's perceived desire for white women, a common racist trope used to justify the oppression of black men. In the early 20th century, interracial relationships, especially between black men and white women, provoked immense fear and anger in white society. Black men were often depicted as hypersexual and predatory, an image deeply rooted in white supremacist ideology. Kong's obsession with and the subsequent violence it causes, mirrors the way black men were historically portrayed as threatening figures who endangered white women. This was a key justification for the brutal lynching of black men, especially in the Jim Crow South, where the protection of white women from perceived black threats was a central excuse for racial violence. 3. The otherness of King Kong. Kong, much like the black men he is meant to symbolize, is portrayed as the other, a being that is alien, uncivilized, and animalistic. This metaphorical otherness reflects the fear of the unknown, a fear that white society harbored toward black people, particularly those from Africa. Kong's capture and forced exhibition in New York mirrors the exploitation and dehumanization of African people during colonialism, particularly through practices like human zoos, where black Africans were put on display for white audiences. Moreover, Kong is brought into the modern, civilized world, only to wreak havoc. This further reinforces the narrative of black men being incompatible with white, Western civilization, echoing the racist belief that black people were inherently wild and unable to assimilate into the norms of a white-dominated society. 4. White fear and power structures. The fear of Kong in King Kong aligns with the fear of racial integration and the loss of white supremacy. Kong's destruction of New York City after breaking free can be seen as a metaphor for the perceived threat of racial unrest or upheaval in America. This reflects the fear many white Americans held during the time, that the empowerment of black people, politically, socially, or sexually, would disrupt the established racial power structures. Kong's capture, enslavement, and eventual death at the hands of white men, symbolized by airplanes shooting him down from the Empire State Building, represent the lengths to which white society would go to maintain control and prevent the perceived danger of black men's presence, especially when it came to relationships with white women. 5. Contrast with modern interpretations of King Kong. While the original King Kong was steeped in the racial dynamics and fears of its time, modern interpretations of the character have shifted away from the overt racial metaphor. More contemporary films emphasize environmentalism, human exploitation of nature, and anti-colonialism as central themes, downplaying the racial allegory. However, the original film remains a product of its era, where the narrative of a savage from a foreign land threatening a white woman was unmistakably tied to the racial tensions and fears of the period. Correlations with white fear in the present day. Much like the racial anxieties expressed in King Kong, the dehumanization of black men continues in different forms, particularly in politics and social rhetoric surrounding immigration, crime, and policing. As we discussed in the context of the debate between Kamala Harris and President Trump, white fear still plays a powerful role in shaping public perception of people of color, especially in framing them as threats to the safety and cultural purity of white Americans. Trump's anti-immigration rhetoric, particularly against Haitian and other black immigrants, draws on these same fears of the other, echoing the fears of interracial relationships and racial integration that dominated white America in the 1930s and beyond. Conclusion. The original King Kong serves as a disturbing metaphor for the dehumanization of black men, playing on white fears of racial integration and interracial relationships. This fear has persisted throughout American history and continues to be weaponized in modern political discourse. By drawing on racialized fears, King Kong and current political rhetoric expose how deeply embedded these anxieties are in white supremacist ideologies, illustrating the ongoing challenges of confronting and dismantling systemic racism in America.